1. The Stranger.
I don't usually pick up hitchhikers, but this one was different. He wasn't young like the others, and he didn't have a bag, or a girlfriend, or a sign with London or Lancaster on it. He just stood there, beside the road, with his hand out, waiting. He was a man about 40 years old, in a grey suit and red tie. He was just watching the cars and waiting. He was watching me while I slowed down. I remember his eyes. Very pale blue eyes, staring at me through thin gold glasses. They looked surprised. Perhaps I was something strange, something not quite real to him. Or perhaps he just had bad eyes. Perhaps he couldn't see very well. I stopped the car and opened the window. "Where are you going?" I asked. "I'm going into town," he said. "Into Lancaster. Could you give me a lift, please?" "Yes, okay," I said. "I'm going that way. Jump in." He got in and sat down beside me. "Thank you very much," he said. "It's very kind of you." "That's all right," I said. "It's my pleasure." I started the car and thought about the words he had used. There was something strange about them. Hitchhikers don't usually speak like that. They usually say something like, "Are you going to Lancaster? Oh, good, thanks a lot." He spoke politely, like an older man. But this man wasn't very old. Perhaps he's foreign, I thought. I looked at him and noticed something else. "Could you put your seatbelt on, please?" I said. He looked at me. "I'm all right," he said. "I don't like seatbelts very much. I feel like a prisoner in the car." "It's the law, you know, and I'm a police sergeant, so I think you should wear one in my car." "Oh, yes, I'm so sorry. The law, yes, I forgot." He looked around him, but for a moment he couldn't find the seatbelt. "It's there, behind you," I said. "You do it like this." I helped him to put on the seatbelt. "Yes, thank you," he said. "I'm terribly sorry. I never remember these things." "Oh, really?" I said. "Why? Don't you have a car?" "No, not now. I don't like them. I did have one once, but that was a long time ago." For a moment I thought he would continue, but then he stopped talking and stared quietly out of the window. I looked at him again. I'm a police officer, so it's my job to look at people and to think carefully about them. I was sure there was something strange about this man. His hair. Nobody has their hair cut quite like that now. And that suit. It was quite clean, quite new, but the trousers and lapels were wider than they usually are. Where had I seen a suit like that before? "Do you live near here?" I asked. I was still wondering about him. Was he a foreigner? He smiled at me. "I live in Lancaster, in the centre of the town, in fact." I was listening carefully. He speaks very good English, I thought. He speaks in the local way. I don't think he is a foreigner. But that face! It's the middle of summer now, and we've had a lot of sun this year. Why is he so pale? "What sort of job do you do?" I asked. He smiled at me again. "Oh, I don't have a job at the moment," he said. "That's why I don't have a car now, you see." "You haven't driven for a long time, then?" I said. He looked at me again. That same quiet, surprised look. "No, I haven't," he said. "Not for a long time." I smiled at him. "I thought you hadn't," I said. "You've had to wear seatbelts in a car for many years." "Sorry," I continued. "It's my job. Police officers always play at detectives." "Yes, I see," he said. He smiled. A quiet, polite smile was on his mouth, but those pale eyes were still and empty. Then for a moment I stopped thinking about him because there was a lot of traffic on the road. Cars were moving very slowly, and I saw a policeman in front, with several police cars and flashing blue lights. I knew the policeman, so I stopped the car beside him. "What's the matter, John?" I asked. "It's an accident, Sue," he said. "One car stopped suddenly, and another car went into the back of it." "Anyone hurt?" "3 people, I think, but they don't look too bad. The ambulance will be here soon." "Do you need any help?" I wasn't in uniform, but I had to ask. He thought for a moment, and I heard the sound of the ambulance. It was coming towards us. "Well, it looks quite nasty, but we'll be okay when the ambulance comes, Sue. There are 2 police cars here already, but you can ask the sergeant over there if you like. He'll know." "All right, John. Thanks." I drove on slowly to the accident. There was glass all over the road, and the 2 damaged cars were by the side of the road on the left. It seemed that one car had hit the back of the other and pushed it off the road. A young girl was sitting at the side of the road with a policeman. Her face was covered in blood. A man was lying on the ground beside the second car, and another policeman was kneeling beside him. The sergeant was talking to the driver of the first car, who was still in his seat.
2. An accident.
I parked the car, got out, and went over to the man on the ground. "Is there anything I can do?" I asked the policeman. He looked up, surprised, and then he recognized me. "Oh, it's you, Sue. I think he's okay. He's breathing and his heart's fine, but I don't like the look of that leg." One of the man's legs was broken in 2 places. It looked like there were 2 knees. He was breathing, but his eyes were closed, and his face was very white. "Can you go and help Chris with the little girl?" he said. "I think this man is her father." I looked at the little girl. She was trying to walk, but she seemed confused. The policeman was holding her arm. I went over and knelt in front of her. There was blood all over her face. I couldn't see her eyes very well. "Hello," I said. "My name's Sue. I'm a police officer. Can you see me?" She wiped her face with her hand and nodded. "Good," I said. "What's your name?" "Kate." "Kate. Okay, Kate. You heard that sound just now, didn't you? That was the ambulance. This policeman, Chris, and I are going to take you over to the ambulance, and then the ambulance men will take you to the hospital and look after you. You're going to be all right." "But what about my daddy?" "He'll come with you in the ambulance. He's going to be all right too." I held one of the girl's arms, and Chris held the other. We took the little girl over to the ambulance and sat talking with her, while the ambulance men lifted her father and the other driver into the ambulance. When the ambulance had gone, I spoke to the sergeant for a few minutes. "What happened?" I asked. "I don't know yet," he said. "I think the first car stopped suddenly, but I can't think why. Still, that's something that we'll have to find out. It's a funny place for an accident. I can only remember one here before, about 20 years ago, I think it was. That was a nasty one, too. A young man was killed, run over by a car. I remember that a little child was hurt then, too." "What happened then?" He shook his head. "I can't remember now. Anyway, this one will be your job in the morning. I'm on holiday next week, remember? Thanks for your help." On the way back to the car, I could see one of the policemen. He was picking up the little girl's doll from the side of the road. He walked over and put it in the police car.
3. A frightened passenger.
When I got back into the car, the hitchhiker was still there. He did look very strange. For a moment, I thought he was crying. "I'm sorry," he said, "but I hate accidents. Were they badly hurt?" I looked at him quickly. His face was very pale, and were his hands shaking? "Quite badly," I said. "One had a broken leg, and the young girl had a lot of glass in her face. But I think they'll live." "Oh, good. I'm sorry I didn't get out, but you see, I hate seeing blood." I smiled. "That's all right. I don't like it either, but I'm a police officer. It's my job." "Yes. I suppose you see a lot of accidents." "Quite a lot, yes. But it's funny, I've never seen one here before. The road's very straight, and it was clear of traffic, and it's not dark or anything. A car stopped suddenly, and another car hit it. It's very strange." For a moment, my passenger didn't answer. He just looked straight in front of him, the grey eyes in the pale face staring at the road and the traffic. Then he said very quietly, "Cars do terrible things, don't they? I hate cars. I hate them." I didn't say anything for a minute. Then I asked him if he had a family in Lancaster. "Yes, I have one son. He's at the university, you know. I'd been there just now, before you picked me up." "Oh, really? Does he like it there?" "Yes, I think so. Yes, he likes it very much." He smiled at me, the same grey, pale smile. "But I still have to look after him, you know. He does silly things, and gets into lots of trouble. He needs me, you know. I'm sure he'd have an accident if I didn't keep an eye on him all the time." That was a very strange thing to say about a son at university. My sister is at the university too, but I don't think my father knows what she's doing every day. I don't think he wants to know, and I'm quite sure she doesn't want her father keeping an eye on her all the time. But before I could say anything else, we had reached the centre of the town. I stopped the car outside the cemetery. "If you want the centre of the town, this is the best place," I said. "I'm driving home after this." "This is perfect." He opened the door carefully and got out. "Thank you very much. You're very kind." "My pleasure." I watched him walk away, a short, pale man in that strange old-fashioned suit. Then I drove out into the traffic and forgot about him.
4. Where's the body?
Next morning, I found the reports of the car accident on my desk. There were photographs of the two cars after the crash and a plan of the area. The two cars had been drawn on the plan. The police had also spoken to two students. They had been walking beside the road at the time of the accident. The students had both seen the first car swerve suddenly in front of the second car and then stop for no reason. But the police hadn't spoken to the drivers of the two cars because they were too ill. So I had to go to the hospital to talk to them. P.C. Brian Jones came with me. The doctors said we couldn't talk to the driver of the second car or the little girl, so we went to see the driver of the first car. He was sitting up in bed. He could talk now, but he had hurt his neck quite badly because the car had stopped very quickly. But it seemed that he didn't want to say much. "Good morning, Mr. Jackson," I said. "I'm a police sergeant. The doctor tells me you're feeling much better this morning." "A bit," he said, "but I still can't move my neck. If you want to talk to me, sit on the end of the bed, and then I can see you." I sat on the end of the bed and looked at him. He was about 30 years old, with a thin brown face, a small moustache, and dark hair. He looked very unhappy, and his eyes always looked away from me when he spoke. "I suppose you want to know about the accident?" he asked. "That's right, Mr. Jackson. Can you remember anything about it?" "Remember it? Yes, of course I can. I've been thinking about it all night. But it wasn't my fault, honestly. You must believe me. I was driving along quite slowly, about 45 miles an hour, I think, or maybe 50, but no more, really. Anyway, there's no special speed limit on that road, is there?" "Only the limit for normal roads. You can go up to 60 miles an hour. "Well, I wasn't driving as fast as that. I was driving quite slowly. The road was clear, and I hadn't been drinking. In fact, I never drink and drive, never. I'm sure the doctors tested that, didn't they, officer?" I looked at my notes. "Yes, I think so. It doesn't say anything here about alcohol, Mr. Jackson." "So it couldn't be my fault, could it? I mean, I was going at a normal speed, slowly even, on a sunny day, and I hadn't been drinking. And then there he was, right in front of me." I felt confused. "I'm sorry, Mr. Jackson. I don't understand. Who was in front of you?" He stared at me strangely. "Well, the man, of course. The man who was killed." Now I was really confused. "What? I'm sorry, Mr. Jackson, but no one was killed. The people in the other car were hurt, but they're both alive. One has a broken leg, I think, and the little girl hurt her face, but that's all." "Which car?" asked Mr. Jackson. "The car that hit you from behind." Now Mr. Jackson looked confused. He looked even more unhappy, and his face went white as the bandage round his neck. "Do you mean... Are you telling me that a car hit me from behind, officer?" "Yes." He put his hands to his neck. He had been trying to shake his head, but he couldn't. "I don't remember that," he said. "You don't remember anything about a car that hit you from behind?" "No, nothing." "And you say there were 2 people in it? A man and a girl? Oh, how terrible!" He began to cry and took a handkerchief from the table beside his bed. I thought carefully. "Let's start from the beginning, Mr. Jackson. You say you were driving along slowly, about 45 miles an hour. Is that right? Then what happened? Think carefully and tell me slowly." He put the handkerchief down and stared at me, his eyes big and wide. "Well, then I saw him, that's all. A man. He was running across the road in front of me. He didn't look where he was going or anything. He was just there, suddenly. I tried to stop, but it was too late. Poor man. I couldn't miss him." I waited until he had finished. The nurse gave him a drink of water. Then I asked quietly, "Mr. Jackson, do you remember anything about this man? I mean, what did he look like?" He looked at me strangely. "Well, I didn't have much time, did I? I suppose he was about 40 or 50 years old, in a suit or something. I don't know. His face was very white. I suppose that was because he was frightened. I think he had glasses on. And there was something red. Perhaps it was a tie, or maybe it was the blood, I don't know. But why does it matter? You've got the body, haven't you? You know who he is? I looked at P.C. Jones. This man's crazy, I thought. Perhaps he has hurt his head, too. I felt sorry for him. I spoke very slowly and carefully. I tried to make my voice as kind as I could. Mr. Jackson, we haven't found a body. No one was killed in the accident. You didn't hit anyone. You just stopped your car suddenly, and the car behind ran into you. That's all. But does that mean you're going to prosecute me? He asked. I'm not sure yet, Mr. Jackson, I said. We haven't finished our investigations. But I'm afraid the police usually prosecute people for dangerous driving if they stop suddenly for no reason. But you can't do that! I'd lose my job. I'm a salesman. I drive hundreds of miles every week, and nobody can work for our company if they have been prosecuted for dangerous driving. That's why I never drink and drive. Never. And I never stop without a good reason. There was a man there, in front of me. I told you. I saw him as clearly as I can see you now. Well, I'm sorry, Mr. Jackson, I said. But there was a serious accident, and at the moment it seems it was your fault. That's all I can say for now.
5. The doctor explains.
Outside the room, the nurse stopped us. Could you both wait in here a moment, please? She said. I think the doctor would like to speak to you. We heard the nurse talking to the doctor outside the room for 2 or 3 minutes, and then the doctor came in. She smiled at me. Good morning, Sergeant Fraser, she said to me. You've been talking to Mr. Jackson, haven't you? Yes, I said. Poor man. He's not very happy, I'm afraid. No, of course not, said the doctor. Well, it was a nasty accident, wasn't it? And he's hurt his neck quite badly. But the rest of him is okay. He should be out of hospital in a few days. Yes. I looked at the doctor carefully. Doctor, are you sure that he hasn't hurt anything else? His head, perhaps? You see, I don't think he remembers the accident very well. He thinks he killed somebody who walked in front of the car, but he didn't. Nobody was killed. Nobody walked in front of the car. And he doesn't remember the second car at all. Yes, I know, she said. I wanted to talk to you about that. Of course, people do forget accidents. That's normal. They often don't remember anything about them. So I'm not surprised that he doesn't remember the second car. But it's very unusual to remember something that didn't happen. She stopped for a moment and looked at me thoughtfully. So I thought, perhaps I shouldn't say this, but I thought you should know. Last night, this man had a small problem with his heart, a very unusual problem. For a few minutes, it beat very slowly. It nearly stopped, and then it started again. And people who have a heart problem like that aren't usually allowed to drive, you know, because they might become ill for a couple of minutes, and then, of course, a car would stop suddenly. I see, I said. So you think that perhaps he had a small heart attack yesterday, too? I don't know, she said. Maybe he had the attack because of the accident. I hadn't seen his doctor's records, so I don't know if he has ever had this problem before. I see, I said. Well, thank you, Doctor.
6. A good explanation.
That explains it then, said Brian Jones, as we drove back to the police station. There wasn't a man in front of his car, and he knows it. I mean, if the man did have this heart problem, then he couldn't have a job as a salesman, could he? He wouldn't have a driving licence, and he'd lose his job. And he's very afraid of losing his job, isn't he? He told us that. Yes, I said. But that doesn't explain his story, does it? Well, yes, maybe it does, Sergeant, he said. Look at it this way. Perhaps this man had a problem with his heart several years ago, and then he got better, so he got his driving licence back. His job and his driving licence are very important to him, so he always drives very, very carefully. He never drinks and drives or does anything silly. And why is he so very, very careful? Because he's always afraid that one day his heart problem will come back, and then he'll lose his licence, his job, and everything. Then yesterday it did come back, and so he had this accident. But he wants us to believe that it wasn't his fault, so he has invented a story about a man who ran in front of the car. Only it isn't a very good story, that's all, because there wasn't a man, and there isn't a body. Brian Jones smiled at me. He is a young, clever policeman, and he was very pleased with himself. It was a good explanation, too. I couldn't see anything wrong with it. Back at the police station, I checked everything carefully. But no one had found a body. No one had seen a man who ran across the road. I looked at the front of Mr. Jackson's car carefully with one of the police scientists. There were no marks on it at all. Only the back of his car was damaged, where the car behind had hit it. Either Mr. Jackson was mad, or he was lying. But I felt sad, and a little angry too. The doctor at the hospital had been very helpful, but why had she told us about Mr. Jackson's heart problem? That was wrong. I wouldn't want my doctor to tell people about me when I was ill. Mr. Jackson's story was crazy, but I really think that he believed it. In my job, you know when people are lying, and I thought Mr. Jackson was telling the truth.
7. Simon.
I talked about it with my boyfriend Simon at dinner that night. Simon is a reporter, so he has to be very careful. He must never write about anything I tell him in his newspaper. If he did, I would lose my job. But we still talk about things, and sometimes it is very useful. I told him about the accident and Mr. Jackson's story. He looked at me thoughtfully. "It's a strange place for an accident, isn't it?" he said. "The road's very straight there." "That's right," I said. "No one ever stops there. I only stop because I—" For a moment I stopped talking, my fork in my hand. "Sue? Sue, what's the matter?" Simon said. "Simon, that's it! I've remembered the thing that worries me about all this. The hitchhiker!" "What?" "The hitchhiker. The man Jackson described. Pale face, suit, glasses, red tie. There was a man like that in my car." Quickly I told Simon about the man that I had picked up before I saw the accident. "Yes, but he wasn't dead, Sue. He was in your car, quite safe, and you picked him up a long way away from the accident." "Not very far away, about half a kilometre perhaps. The traffic was moving very slowly because of the accident. Maybe he walked there. It's possible." "You mean Perhaps the hitchhiker was walking across the road, and Jackson saw him, stopped his car, and then the other car hit Jackson's car. Yes, that's right. And then the hitchhiker ran on down the road, and then I picked him up. Simon, I have to find that man. Simon looked thoughtful. Yes, but wait a minute, Sue. Why would the hitchhiker cross the road there? There's nothing there. And anyway, if he was walking towards you, he was walking away from town, not towards it. I shook my head. I don't know, but I want to find him. He said he lived in Lancaster. And another thing, Simon, one of the older police sergeants said there had once been an accident on that road before. Something about a child, I think it was. About 20 years ago, maybe more. Can you check in your old newspapers and find out about it? I think it may help. Simon groaned. You want me to check the records for a little thing like that? Do you know how long that takes? I smiled at him. But you'll do it for me, won't you, Simon? I said. Please?